brands in history, peacefully passed away today from natural causes at his home, the Playboy Mansion, surrounded by his loved ones. He was 91 years old. I want to bring in now CNN's Brian Stelter and also historian Douglas Brinkley. Thank you, gentlemen. Douglas, to you first. How does he go down in history?
He's a giant of American journalism. I mean, he really changed things in the 1950s and 60s, not just with having an open discussion about sexuality, but bringing in Playboy magazine extraordinary edgy interviews with people ranging from novelist Jack Kerouac to Kurt Vonnegut, Joseph Heller. It became almost must-read in many ways. And some years ago, he invited me to visit him in the Playboy Mansion, Don, and he had, because as a historian, he wanted me to see his archive, and he had giant scrapbooks. He had saved everything, his entire life, of every kind of ticket and bit, and he was particularly proud of his role in civil rights. He fought against Jim Crow in the South. He had integrated the Playboy clubs in Miami and New Orleans, and you know, he was kind of an avuncular guy, a twinkle in his eye. Even conservative George Will, a fellow Chicagoan, learned to personally like Hefner, even though many people in the women's movement felt Playboy was exploitive.
And listen, Brian, you're our senior media correspondent here. He did change the media in terms of publishing. He will go down in American history. Whether a lot of people agree with him, a lot of people disagree with him, but he energized, or got a lot of criticism and may have energized the women's movement, and so on and so forth. Indeed,
celebrating sexuality in print like no one had ever done before. He inspired rip-offs, copycat magazines. And now you think about Playboy as one of the most famous brand names in the world. Now the magazine itself, the print magazine, is a shell of what it used to be. It's had a lot of tough times recently. But if you think back to the 1970s, this was a magazine that was selling 6 million copies every single time it came out. It was incredibly successful, incredibly provocative but influential. And we see a statement from his one of his children tonight, Cooper, who talked about the role his father played in free speech battles, in social movements. I think Douglas remembers some of these examples about the free speech battles that Playboy was involved in that are influential even today.
But also, even with the federal post office, some people wouldn't deliver it. He had to fight for that, and eventually won to have Playboy delivered via the mail.
A very different culture, of course, a very different society in 1953 when he decided to launch the magazine, and then into the 60s and 70s. We live in a society now that is awash, that is overwhelmed with pornographic imagery. But what he was doing with photos very early on with the magazine.
Really mild now in comparison.
Absolutely, and then we should be honest about how much things have changed, even in the past decade for Playboy. That's partly why the magazine now, his sons have had a harder time making a run at it. But you know, you think about even in recent years, Don, Hugh Hefner starring in a reality show, promoting his lifestyle, promoting his personal lifestyle as a brand. Even recently, in recent years, that was popular among millions of people.
Maybe he was among the first reality show, but I also remember I would sneak when we first got cable, and was it Playboy at Night?
Right.
He had like a television show, the Playboy Mansion. It went from people being upset about a magazine, and all of a sudden he had a TV show, and he would have his pipe and, you know, his smoking jacket, and surrounded by all of these beautiful women. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because he set standards, Douglas, when the Playboy interview debuted in 1962. A frequent contributor was Alex Haley. We know Alex Haley from Roots, right? And then he interviewed jazz legend Miles Davis. And you know, people joked about, oh, I read Playboy for the articles, but some people there were some really good, smart articles in Playboy magazine.
Unbelievably smart articles. They're just the classic interviews of a who's who of people in this Cold War period. You mentioned Miles Davis' interview. He would regularly give jazz artists major featured time, not just in the magazine, but also in the Playboy clubs as they mushroomed around the country. And that whole bunny ears became kind of a symbol for sexual liberation in many ways. I think the big thing, Don, though, that Hefner did, we've got to remember that Playboy took on when the Vietnam War was going on. And he was asking that fundamental question, what is worse, napalm, rolling thunder, bombing South Vietnam, or intimacy and having sex, enjoying one's company. And so in that way, he was a big pioneer. And it's a big loss to American journalism, but he had a great life, had a wonderful run, and had a lot of friends.
Also interviewing some of those groundbreaking interviews early on and taking on, Brian,